Sips espresso.
The aroma, rich and bold, filled his senses. He surveyed the bustling scene at Heathrow. Travellers scurried, a symphony of rolling suitcases and hurried conversations. Not him. David exuded an aura of calm, a stark contrast to the frenetic energy around him. His tailored suit, crisp and sharp, spoke of his success.
Savors the espresso.
He savoured the bitter taste of the espresso, the caffeine a jolt to his senses. His flight, a red-eye to New York, beckoned. Another high-stakes negotiation, another victory to secure. It was time. A shadow fell across his table. David looked up, his gaze steady, unwavering. A woman stood before him, her face etched with anxiety. She clutched a worn leather handbag, her knuckles white with tension.
Mr. Sterling.
David, a seasoned lawyer, recognized desperation when he saw it.
Yes.
May I? Gestures to the chair.
David hesitated, his instinct screaming caution. He nodded curtly, his gaze never leaving her face. She sat down, her movements jerky, her body taut with nervous energy. David noted the tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted around. He waited, his silence a weapon, forcing her to speak first.
You don't know me, voice barely audible, but I know you.
David's jaw tightened imperceptibly.
I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage, voice smooth, controlled.
5 years ago, voice trembling, you represented a man, Richard Kendall.
The name struck a chord, a distant memory. A high-profile case, a CEO accused of embezzlement. David had won, securing a not guilty verdict.
Mr. Kendall, voice gaining strength, he stole from his company, millions.
I believe the court found otherwise, voice icy.
He was guilty, eyes blazing with sudden fury, and you helped him get away with it.
David leaned back, his gaze piercing. The accusation hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his mind racing. This was no random encounter, this was a setup. David
ruined lives.
She blurted out, her voice thick with emotion.
Families lost everything because of him.
David remained silent, his gaze unwavering. He knew how to use silence as a weapon, to create pressure, to force a confession.
I need money.
She finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper.
Money to make things right.
Ah, there it was, the real motive, blackmail. David felt a surge of adrenaline, a familiar thrill of the chase.
And what makes you think I would help you?
He asked, his voice devoid of emotion. She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes.
Because you owe me. You owe it to the people he hurt.
David leaned back in his chair, considering her words. He had a job to do, a client to defend. And defend him he did, with every fibre of his being. He studied the woman's face, her desperation a tangible thing. She was playing a dangerous game, but what was her angle? He needed information, leverage.
Tell me about these families Richard Kendall hurt. Tell me their stories.
She hesitated, suspicion clouding her features.
Indulge me. S2? Why?
He said, his lips curling into a faint smile. She recounted tales of financial ruin, of lives shattered by Kendall's greed. David listened intently, his mind working furiously. He committed every detail to memory, his photographic recall a valuable asset.
And you believe money will right these wrongs?
It's a start.
He knew she was desperate, but he also sensed a steely resolve beneath her fear. This wasn't just about money, it was personal.
You misunderstand my role in all of this. I was Mr. Kendall's lawyer, My duty was to ensure he received a fair trial, nothing more.
A fair trial? He bought his way out.
And within that system, my client was found not guilty. The justice system is far from perfect, but it is the system we have.
He watched as her frustration grew, her body trembling with suppressed rage. He had her exactly where he wanted her.
You think this is a game, don't you? These are real people's lives you're playing with.
And you are attempting to profit from their misfortune.
The accusation hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. The woman's face paled, her defiance crumbling under his scrutiny. He rose from his seat, his movements smooth, deliberate.
I suggest you choose your next steps carefully. Blackmail is a serious offense.
He turned to leave, his heart pounding with a strange mix of exhilaration and disgust. The woman remained seated, her shoulders slumped, her gaze fixed on the table. She had lost, and they both knew it. David walked away without a backward glance, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous terminal. He had won, just like he always did. But this victory felt different. There was no satisfaction, no sense of accomplishment. Only a lingering unease, a bitter aftertaste. He had seen the darkness in her eyes, the desperation that had driven her to such lengths. As he made his way to his gate, the image of the woman's face stayed with him. He had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The flight was long, the drone of the engines a constant reminder of his encounter. David tried to focus on the upcoming negotiations, on the millions at stake, but the woman's words echoed in his mind.
These are real people's lives you're playing with.
He had justified his actions countless times. He was a lawyer, a defender of rights, a champion of the underdog. But what about the victims, the people whose lives were shattered by the very system he navigated so effortlessly? He closed his eyes, trying to block out the doubts. He had always believed in the law, in its power to deliver justice. But what if the law was flawed? What if justice was nothing more than an illusion? The image of the woman's face, etched with desperation and despair, haunted his thoughts. David stepped off the plane, his footsteps echoing in the jetway. The familiar scent of jet fuel and coffee filled his nostrils, grounding him in the present. He was back in his element, the city's energy invigorating him. He hailed a cab, the driver's gruff greeting a welcome distraction. As the car weaved through the early morning traffic, David couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. He was still the same ruthless lawyer, the master strategist, but a seed of doubt had been planted. He arrived at his hotel, the opulent lobby a stark contrast to the gritty streets outside. He checked in, his movements automatic, his mind still preoccupied. He had a big day ahead of him, a merger to negotiate, millions to secure. But as he closed the door to his suite, the image of the woman's face flashed before his eyes. He couldn't erase the encounter, the raw emotion, the unsettling truths. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid of familiar comfort. He had a choice to make. He could ignore the nagging doubts, bury them deep within the recesses of his mind. Or he could embrace the discomfort, let it challenge his carefully constructed worldview.